Before we begin, this episode is not doctrine. It is not theology. It is not science. It is not mythology class. And it is certainly not an attempt to teach you what to believe. What you're about to hear is research, stitched together from ancient texts, fractured mythologies, forbidden echoes, erased cosmologies, and the stories the systems never wanted you to follow too closely. Some of it may sound familiar. Some of it may sound uncomfortably ancient, and some of it was never meant to be spoken aloud. This time we're not descending into one crack. We're peeling back the oldest foundation they tried to bury entirely. The first mother, the one beneath creation itself, the one whose body became the world, the one whose womb... The one whose womb still echoes beneath every story we've been handed. Again, I am not here to preach, and I am not here to argue. I'm here, as always, to pull on the forbidden threads and invite you to wonder where they lead. Today we meet Gaia, not as a poetic symbol, not as a pretty goddess, but as the first fracture buried beneath the myths. Before Eden, before Lilith, before Sophia, before the flood, before the gods were organized into tidy lineages, there was the mother. We call her Gaia. The Greeks handed us her name. Gaia literally means earth. I'm recording in the evening, so there's lots of bugs attracted to the light of the screen. So I do apologize if you hear, extra sounds today. And yes, we have crickets tonight, which is quite nice. So, Gaia means earth. The primordial womb, the one who birthed the heavens, the one who carried all that exists. In the ancient Greek cosmology, recorded in Hesiod's Theogony around 700 before Common Era, Gaia emerges before the gods we recognize today. She is not one of the Olympians. She is not one of Zeus' children. She is the beginning. Quote from Theogony: "In the beginning there was chaos, and then came Gaia, the broad-breasted earth, the ever-sure foundation of all. From Gaia the cosmos unfolds. Uranus, sky, her son and later consort. The Titans, the giants, the fates, the sea, the mountains, the creatures of land, sea, and air. But Gaia wasn't simply a goddess. She was the structure itself, the ground, the breath, the container. Her body was not separate from creation. It was creation. The trees grew from her ribs. The rivers flowed through her veins. The mountains rose from her spine. The oceans pulsed with her breath. This isn't myth. This is cosmological language, a primitive memory of something very old, that life was first held inside a womb before it was controlled by thrones. And the further back we go, the more we find her echoes, because Gaia isn't unique to Greece. Her fingerprints show up across ancient systems long before the Olympus. In Anatolia, Cybele, the mountain mother. In Sumer, Ninhursag, lady of the sacred mountain. In Mesopotamia, Ki, earth goddess, paired with Anu, sky. In Egypt, Nut and Geb, sky and earth inverted. In pre-Vedic traditions, Prithvi, the earth mother. The names change, the myths evolve, but the core remains. The womb came first, before thrones, before kings, before priests. The feminine held the center, and that is exactly why she had to be buried. The world didn't begin with a god. It began with a womb. In the beginning there was only chaos, the vast, formless void. Not evil, not male, not even structured, just pure untamed potential. And from that void, she arrived, Gaia. The oldest surviving account of creation we have, Theogony, written by Hesiod nearly 700 years before Christ, opens like this. First came chaos, then Gaia, broad-breasted earth, the ever-sure foundation of all. She did not need to be created. She simply was. Gaia wasn't a character. She was the structure itself. Her body was the ground. Her breath was the wind. Her pulse was the sea. Her spine was the mountains. And she began to create from herself. Without partner, without invasion, without domination. Life poured out directly from her womb. Hesiod tells us, and Gaia bore Pontus, the barren deep, the sea, and then the great mountains and the broad earth sacred places. The sea, the mountains, the rivers, the endless terrain of life all emerged from her flesh. Gaia's womb created the world itself. But then came the sky. After birthing Pontus and the mountains, Gaia brought forth Uranus, the starry sky. At first he was born from her, but quickly he became something else. Not partner, not protector, but dominator. The sky descended onto the earth, laid upon her, covered her, and pressed his body against hers. The world's first relationship was not cooperation, it was cosmic violation. The sky ruled the womb, and with each forced union, Gaia bore children under domination. The Titans, the Cyclops, the 100-handed ones. And Uranus, he feared them, feared what her womb was capable of producing, feared the power rising from her. Hesiod writes, and Uranus hated his children, and he hid them all deep inside Gaia, leaving her groaning beneath the weight. Womb turned into prison. Children buried back inside their mother's body. Creation weaponized as containment. But Gaia would not remain silent. She forged a great cycle from flint, and called to her children, "Who among you will rise and free me?" The youngest Titan stepped forward, Kronos, the bringer of time. When Uranus descended again to take her, Kronos struck. He castrated Uranus, severed the sky's manhood. Hesiod records, and from the blood of Uranus came the Furies, the giants and the nymphs, and from the foam of his severed flesh upon the sea, Aphrodite arose. Even in mutilation, the feminine kept creating. Life still burst forth from the violence. And now Kronos rules, but like his father, he too fears the prophecy. One of his children will overthrow him. And so Kronos does what kings do, and what children do when they repeat patterns. Like unless you see the pattern to break it, you can't break it, so you just repeat and you just go on a loop and loop and loop. So he devours his offspring. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, all swallowed alive, consumed at birth. Oh man. Creation turned into control, the womb again silenced. Yet Rhea, like Gaia before her, hides the last child, Zeus. Zeus grows in secret, and when the time comes, he rises. He forces Kronos to regurgitate his siblings. The Olympians emerge, and war erupts, the great Taitonokamaki. Oh my, sorry. Taitonomaki. For 10 years, brother fought brother, son against father, sky against womb, until Zeus stood victorious. The new divine order was installed. Male rule absolute. Gaia pushed deeper into silence. The sovereign womb buried beneath the gods' thrones. The world began with the woman, and every god that followed fought to erase her. By now you've probably noticed the pattern, and once you see it, you really can't unsee it. I mean, I can't, but who knows? To each their own. It's absolutely fine. This is just stories that I'm telling. The world didn't simply evolve. It was rewritten, and not gently. The descent from Gaia to Zeus, that was never just a cosmic family drama. That was the first hostile takeover. What started as the womb birthing creation was slowly replaced by the throne issuing orders. The slow systemic seizure of origin, not just fertility, not just childbirth, the theft of creation itself. Across the ancient world, before sky gods, before kings, before priesthoods, there were mother-centered cosmologies. We still find their fingerprints in the Kataluyuk, I think that's how you say it, I'm really sorry, figurines. I tried so hard to learn that word. In Neolithic Turkey, 7500 BCE. The mountain mother Cybele of Anatolia. The Sumerian Ki, Earth herself before Anu took the sky. The Egyptian inversion of Nut, sky, and Geb, earth. The erased Asherah, once consort of El, before she was cut from the scrolls. You see, Asherah wasn't a minor goddess. She was once called the Queen of Heaven, the Mother of the Gods. She was the Semitic echo of Gaia, the one who stood beside El, not beneath him. And El, for those who never truly got to study the banned footnotes, was the ancient father god of the Canaanite pantheon. Before Yahweh stood alone in the Hebrew Bible, there was El, sitting over a full council of gods. The name El literally just meant God in the old Semitic languages, long before monotheism took the stage. But as monotheism emerged, the feminine couldn't stay. The priesthoods cut her out. The scribes renamed her, and the text buried her beneath phrases like sacred poles and grooves. You can actually still see her shadow in the text that survived right there in the book of 1 Kings chapter 14 verse 23. They also built for themselves high places, sacred pillars, and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every spreading tree. Of course, depending on which translation you're reading, you may find a politely scrubbed out altogether, reduced to grooves or wooden objects, because apparently that was more comfortable. That's where we got. And this is where inversion enters fully. The sovereign womb was flipped into subordinate vessel. Creation no longer came from the woman's body, but from the man's voice. So we just replace it. Womb with word, breast with throne, birth with command, sovereignty with obedience. Amazing, isn't it? How many religions figured out how to replace labor pains with a speech? As priesthoods rose, the control over origin became control over the entire system. Not just spiritually, not just fertility, statecraft. And this is where one of their favorite rituals comes in. The hieros gamos, the sacred marriage. Hieros gamos was presented as holy. A king or high priest performing ritual sex with a priestess who symbolized the goddess, to magically unite heaven and earth, to secure fertility and keep the crops growing. Or let's be honest, the entire future of the kingdom depends on His Majesty's, divine desires. The sovereign feminine, who once birthed life directly, was reduced to a symbolic vessel. Creation wasn't feminine power anymore. It was permission. Permission granted by kings, managed by priests, endorsed by sky gods. And this inversion spread everywhere. In Babylon, Ishtar becomes sex and subjugation. In Greece, Aphrodite becomes beauty without authority. In Rome, Vestal virgins guard the flame but lose all power. In Hebrew law, women become transaction, property, and legal contract. The temples changed. The names changed. The gods changed. But the system stayed intact. Generation after generation. I didn't steal creation. The gods appointed me to manage it. The great inversion wasn't evolution. It was calculated architecture, a full seizure of the womb. And the mother who once birthed everything, buried beneath the throne. The seizure of the womb was never total. Even the most aggressive empires leave cracks behind. And while the priesthoods tightened control, while kings declared themselves divine administrators, the memory of the mother refused to fully die. She went underground, hidden, fragmented, whispered. And this is where the forbidden memory begins breathing again. You can still trace her if you know where to look. In Eleusis, the secret rites of Demeter and Persephone preserved fragments of the Great Mother's descent. In Samothrace, mystery initiates honored the earth's fertility beneath the public gods of Olympus. In Orphic cults, whispered teachings held remnants of earlier earth-centered cosmology. In the Thesmophoria, Greek women secretly honored Demeter's power of life and death, without priesthood oversight. In Egypt, echoes of Isis held the feminine current with a dominantly male priesthood structure. And you may have noticed we already whispered her name a few times. Cybele. So let's pull her fully into the light. Long before Rome, long before Greece, in the ancient lands of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, she stood, the mountain mother, the sovereign womb. Unlike the priestly versions that came later, Cybele was not a goddess of something. She simply was. The wild earth, the untamed mountain, the raw creative force of life itself. Her priests, known as the Galli, were male servants who willingly castrated themselves. Look, I'm not even I can't, because I don't want to offend anyone with my sarcasm and dark humor. So we stay. Because no man could serve the Great Mother while retaining the power to create life. The womb was sovereign, and no one shared her throne. You can already feel how that was never going to sit comfortably with the rising kings. After all, male priesthoods weren't exactly known for their eagerness to surrender power. When the Roman Empire expanded, Cybele couldn't be fully erased. She was too old, too embedded. So instead they absorbed and sanitized her, renamed her Magna Mater, the Great Mother, imported her into the empire, smoothed over her wildness, tamed her rituals. Her sovereign fire dimmed, but not fully extinguished, because even in her edited state, the memory of Gaia refused to fully die. These were all fragments of the same forbidden current. Gaia, Cybele, Demeter, Isis, Asherah, Sophia, different names, different languages, same fracture though, and the same wound, the sovereign womb, still breathing beneath the altars built to silence her. You might be wondering, why? Why did they need to rewrite origin stories so violently? Why not simply allow multiple creation narratives to coexist? Why seize the womb? Because controlling creation is not just about gods. It's about controlling the entire mental architecture of power. The original womb, the sovereign feminine, represents something far more dangerous to empires: autonomy. Autonomy over life, over death, over cycles, over food, body, family, birth, healing, land, and law. The sovereign womb carried self-governance, and self-governance is always the enemy of empire. When the womb holds creation, kings become unnecessary, priests become unnecessary, and intermediaries lose their leverage, because creation does not require permission. It simply is. And so, from the very beginning of empire-building systems, the architecture of suppression targeted origin itself, first by replacing womb with word, then by embedding purity codes into female bodies, then by inserting ritual hierarchies that placed priesthoods between woman and life, and finally by building legal systems where the female body itself became state property. When you control who gets to define where life comes from, you control who gets to rule. This isn't just theology. This is generational trauma architecture. The original fracture of origin inversion lives inside the cultural nervous system. The shame placed on menstruation, the suspicion towards midwives, the purity tests surrounding virginity, the violence against women who claim spiritual authority, the demonization of sexual sovereignty, all symptoms of the same original inversion, all rooted in the seizure of the womb. After all, if the womb belongs to empire, the body can be taxed, controlled, punished, married off, or traded. And all of it feels divinely sanctioned. Because when you invert origin, you invert sovereignty. And once you invert sovereignty, you own the human psyche itself. The great inversion was not just a story rewrite. It was the blueprint for global spiritual submission. We've circled around it long enough. The fracture that sits beneath all of this, beneath Gaia, beneath Sophia, beneath the forbidden wombs of history, has always led us right back to Eden. Because Eden isn't just a garden, it's an architectural erasure. The biblical creation story we were handed, in the beginning God created, let there be light, he formed man from dust, wasn't a standalone event. It was already an edited draft of far older, far messier, far more dangerous origins. Genesis 1 gives us one version, male and female created together, simultaneous, balanced. Genesis 2 gives us another, Adam alone, Eve formed afterward, secondary, pulled from the man's rib. The first inversion lives inside that rib. The sovereign feminine who birthed creation itself is now presented as an afterthought, a helper, a vessel, a derivative existence. You can almost feel the scribes sweating over the draft, can't you? Oh, make sure the woman comes second. Make sure her existence depends on the man. Oh, that way nobody gets confused about who owns what. And this fracture didn't start with Moses. The Eden inversion mirrors the same pattern found across countless other systems. In Sumer, Ki gives way to Anu. In Anatolia, Cybele gets neutered and absorbed. In Canaan, Asherah is erased from El's side. In Greece, Gaia fades behind Olympus. In Egypt, Nut becomes backdrop for male dynasties. In Gnosticism, Sophia's wisdom is exiled. Different names, same system. The inversion repeats. The Garden of Eden isn't simply a fall story. It's a seizure of origin. The story starts after the real theft has already occurred. The feminine has already been repositioned beneath the masculine. The sovereign womb, once holding creation, has already been folded into man's body. Eve becomes the perfect symbol of inversion, formed from Adam's rib, blamed for disobedience, cursed in childbirth, subject to the man's rule. The feminine loses authority, but carries the burden, and the inversion repeats across doctrine, law, culture, language, and generations, until the entire human psyche forgets the fracture ever occurred, and calls it natural order. For all their rewriting, for all their erasures, for all the centuries of control, the fracture never disappeared. The memory of the sovereign womb refused to die quietly, because memory doesn't need permission. You can bury a name. You cannot bury what lives in the blood. Even as patriarchies locked down origin, the forbidden current kept leaking through the cracks. In whispered rituals passed from mother to daughter, in the survival of midwives and healers despite outlawed knowledge, in fertility rites hidden beneath public festivals, in sacred herbs remembered by women long after priesthoods forbade their use, in underground mystery schools that kept fragments breathing behind closed doors. The system buried the goddess, but the earth remembered. You cannot erase the mother of origin from the land itself. Even the doctrines that condemned her couldn't fully sever the thread. Gnostic texts preserved Sophia. Apocryphal scrolls whispered of Lilith. Folk traditions disguised the sacred feminine as saints, madonnas, and holy mothers. Even as they preached obedience to empire, the old prayers still carried her name, hiding in plain sight. Because the sovereign womb never truly belonged to them. It belongs to memory. It belongs to blood. It belongs to us. And that's why we're still pulling this thread. Because sometimes the only way to reclaim what was stolen is to speak what was forbidden. So what happens when creation becomes property? What happens when origin is no longer sovereign, but managed, controlled, and enclosed? You collapse life into systems of closed bloodlines. Once the priesthood seized creation, they no longer wanted life to flow freely. They wanted it preserved, purified, secured. Divine blood must remain divine. Royal seed must remain royal. Sacred lines must not be diluted. And so begins the tightening of the blood. Across the world's oldest systems, you start to see the same pattern. Divine rulers claiming descent from gods. Royal families intermarrying to protect the line. Priesthoods keeping their sacred office within exclusive blood groups. Closed genealogies where contamination was feared and purity was obsessed over. From the pharaohs of Egypt, to the kings of Sumer, to the dynasties of Europe, to the priesthood lineages hidden behind religious walls, all variations of the same fracture. The great inversion didn't just steal origin, it turned creation into a blood contract. And once that contract was written, the spiral of inbreeding became inevitable. What began as a seizure of the womb ends as a collapse of the gene pool. Health declines, defects emerge, Power concentrates, fragility multiplies, but the system defends itself because the illusion of purity must survive. You can almost hear the priests chanting, "Better defective kings than impure ones." The ultimate irony is that their fear of contamination created its own corruption. And this is where our next descent will take us. Because once you follow the forbidden question all the way back to origin, you eventually arrive here, at the uncomfortable possibility that inbreeding was not an accident. And that is where we'll be heading next. So, here we are, another one. I really hope you are still following, give us a like, give us a hello, just show that you're still listening. Come and find me on Instagram at Bloodmyths. No, at Bloodline Myths. That's where you will find me, okay? And yes, new episodes, new threads every 2 weeks. Where is it going to take us after that? I don't know. We'll just keep following the threads. Until then, bye!